There you go.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies for I lied. I said we were going to be 2 minutes late. I see that we're 4 minutes late. So I apologize, but we'll give everyone a chance to join. Really excited about today's session. I hope everyone's enjoying themselves so far and enjoying TMF week. I know it's been a whirlwind here at Montreal. But yeah, as always, really excited. Great speakers, great sessions. See that we have about 85 people going up slowly but surely. So I'll give everyone a few more seconds and then we'll get going. Perfect. So on that note, hello everyone and welcome back to TMF week, day 3, session 2 of the day. But before I begin, I just want to double check maybe a quick thumbs up if everyone can see my screen or in the chat. At the same time, if you guys want to mention where you're dialing in from, where you're joining us from, would love to see where everyone's located in the world. Yes, these are very popular shirts. I'm not sure how many are left anymore. The employees got their hands on them in the storage office. So maybe there's a few lucky of you that can still grab one of the remaining ones. Awesome. So Kim, if we can, Kim is doing our slides on the back end here, controlling everything for us, but just want to go through a few housekeeping items, everyone's favorite part of the presentations. Before everyone starts asking, I promise everything is recorded. Everything will be available at the end of the day, including obviously the recordings that I just mentioned, but the slides as well. You'll all also be receiving a certificate of attendance, which is really cool because you get to show off that you learned some really fun stuff at TMF week. We have reserved a little bit of time at the end of this presentation for Q&A, but as always, you'll see on the right-hand side, apart from the chat, there's a dedicated section for questions and answers. So along the way, if there's anything that is sort of that you want to ask or you want to make sure that you don't miss, or something that you want to make sure Terry addresses at the end, please feel free to write it in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get to it. Session timeline. I know we're starting a little bit late, so I'm going to hand it off to Terry ASAP. He has about a 30-minute presentation prepared for us. We'll have some time, like I said, at the end for Q&A. I'll quickly introduce the next session, and then obviously there'll be a networking break after that. But without taking up too much more of your time, Terry, again, I wanted to personally thank you for being here. It's one of the sessions that I was looking forward to this week. I know the team at Montreal is very appreciative of you speaking with us this year. But on that, I'm going to hand it off to you, and we can dig into today's subject about charting a course to standardization, the future of the TMF reference model. Which was the 9 a.m. session. I just realized, thinking differently, getting the TMF to work with you. That's what I was expecting. You threw me for a loop there, Kim. But on that, Terry, I'm going to hand it off to you, and we can get going.
All right. Well, if you can stop presenting. So here we go. Yes. All right. Are you presenting it now, Chris? There we go. Super. Thanks. All right. Well, I'll echo Chris's comments and thank everyone and welcome you for joining me for this presentation of Thinking Differently, Getting the TMF to Work for You. I'm Terry Endress, Senior Consultant at WCG Avoca. I don't know how many of you are familiar with WCG Avoca, but formerly we were called the Avoca Group. It's a clinical trial quality consortium dedicated to improving quality and compliance in the clinical trial execution processes. The consortium is comprised of 250 plus member companies, cuts across sponsors, CROs, clinical service providers, and even investigative sites. I think there's a good chance many of you will recognize your own company's logos within our ranks. As for me, I'm Terry Endress. I joined WCG Avoca in 2018, following a 28-year career with Eli Lilly. At Lilly, I assumed any number of roles throughout engineering, product development, clinical development, Lean Six Sigma. My final 2 years were focused on improving our TMF management performance. As evidenced by the title, the gist of this presentation is to get the TMF to work for you. And the rest of the story would be, and not the other way around. My own personal belief is that we get ourselves into trouble when we treat the management of the TMF as a separate and distinct activity from managing the trial itself. It's easy for all of our companies to fall into the trap of maintaining two sets of books, the Compliance TMF and then the Real TMF, and spend more time trying to reconcile the two than we would getting things right the first time. I think it's this propensity for trouble that prompts executives to ask basically what's here on the slide. You know, how do I know if my TMF is complete and up to date? And frankly, that's a valid question. That is a question that's mandated by regulators. You know, it's in the guidance that sponsors should implement risk-based quality checks or review processes to ensure the TMF is being maintained and up to date. Likewise, companies like our own, the Avoca Quality Consortium, we equip organizations with tools and techniques to answer just those kinds of questions. So that this is all valid, and it's something that you do hear regularly. It is mandated, required by the regulators. Still, for me personally, when I hear a question like that, how do I know if my TMF is complete and up to date? It just makes me wonder, have we missed the point? And what I'm referring to there is, you know, when E6R2 came out, you know, that was a very large increase in expectations in regard to quality management of our clinical trial processes. You know, E6R2 talked about all of these evolutions in technology and risk management, increased standards for clinical trial quality. They even went so far as designating the maintaining of record locations. So the question around, you know, is my TMF complete and up to date? It is mandated by the regulators. You have the guidance here, and along with this guidance in regard to specifically the locations of our TMFs and so forth, it's also talking about all these advances in technological systems and everything else. So when I hear that question, you know, is my TMF complete and up to date? You know, how much of all of your activities around making sure it is complete and up to date, how much of that is really getting to it being a value add activity? So for example, as we go to the next slide here, my concern is that these mandates in regard to doing your quality checks and putting in these processes to make sure that your TMFs are complete and up to date, that there's a piece of me that feel like these are prescribed fixes for failed eTMF implementations. You know, as we take a look at the current environment, oftentimes as sponsors implement eTMFs, oftentimes they're basically implementing paper TMF processes in an electronic environment. And as well, what happens is all of the users and operators of the eTMF are bringing their paper TMF behaviors with them. Likewise, as you take a look at these tools and techniques, and I show the diagram there of something from our knowledge center, oftentimes these tools and techniques are basically utilizing paper TMF management processes and applying them to eTMF management processes. So in my mind, and it's no surprise that back in as early as April 2014, the MHRA came out with, their new guidance, and they were introducing issues around having critical findings for TMFs. And they had a press release that stated, over the last year, 35% of commercial sponsor inspections have resulted in extra days having to be added to complete inspections where there have been difficulties ensuring the TMF is complete and readily available. This is particularly problematic with electronic eTMFs. So again, here's where I think we're seeing then a lot of the heightened expectations coming from the likes of MHRA, EMA, saying that, hey, you've got to do a better job of basically keeping your electronic TMFs up to date. Over on the right-hand side, I've made this qualification, this asterisk comment that, as the executives are making these pronouncements saying that our eTMF implementation will fix our TMF problems, well, I think based upon those early implementations, based upon the feedback from the regulators, the little asterisk comment there is, eTMF implementations were more likely to reveal TMF problems than they were to fix them. So in all of this then, all of this excitement and focus and consternation in regard to trial master files, why all the fuss? So I thought I'd take a step back and consider, just what is it we're all about? And we can go back to E6, and we're certainly familiar with E6's introduction of TMF and essential documents. Those were expectations that were actually delivered in the original version of E6. I think by and large, many of us, as we take a look at some of the extracts I've copied here and put onto the slide, most of us are very familiar with the detailed requirements. There's a whole thing about Section 8. They even list some examples of essential documents and so forth. So they have all of these explicit expectations around trial master file and trial master file management. I think there's a propensity to overlook something that's stated in all of those requirements, but oftentimes overlooked. And it's the red blurb down on the left there saying, filing essential documents in a timely manner can greatly assist in the successful management of a trial by the investigator, sponsor, and monitor. So again, I would come back to, are your TMFs and are your TMF procedures and your management of the TMF, is it helping you to, the underlying statement here, greatly assist in the successful management of the trial? And I think oftentimes what can happen is all of these processes and trying to maintain these two sets of books and, keeping everything up to date, if we're not careful, we can actually go in the opposite direction. All right, so that was E6. I think all of us are also familiar with the EU, the clinical trial regulation. But before that, there was also guidance from the EU in regard to TMF. But what's presented on this slide are really a couple different pieces. The right-hand side, the paper image, that's an extract from Article 57. This is actual legislation. So again, E6 and things of that nature, those things are called guidance. And, like the FDA will adopt that as guidance, but quite frankly, it's not really legislated requirement. When you see things like the clinical trial regulation and Article 57, and they start talking about, the requirements for a trial master file and require that it be up to date and that it be readily available and directly accessible upon request to member states, that's no longer guidance. That is basically legislated requirements. You know, that becomes law. And then complementary to that, on the left-hand side, you can see some extracts from EMA guidance or from the EMA guideline. And again, I'll still draw your attention to the fourth bullet, the underlined emphasis. And again, they're coming back to saying that, hey, this requirement of keeping your TMF up to date at all times means that the TMF should have all documentation added in a timely manner during the trial, as this greatly assists the successful management of a trial. So again, that's basically echoing or restating what was already mentioned in E6. They're coming back to say that, you know, the reason why we want you all to do all of this is because we think this is the way that you have a more successful trial. And again, it's been my read for a long time that within the EU and MHRA in particular, you know, they equate how well you've managed your TMF with how well you have managed your trial. I'll still leave you with the question. So are your TMFs and TMF procedures and all of these processes helping to greatly assist the successful management of a trial? Kind of moving on then, lastly, let me bring your attention to E8. And I kind of refer to E8R1 as a bit of a prequel to E6R2. Of course, E6R2 is the one that brought about the whole thing in regard to risk-based quality management. Well, as we get into E8R1, that's where they've introduced the foundational elements of what risk-based quality management is all about. And in particular, within E8R1, that they have this quality by design of clinical studies. And I believe that E8 has very succinctly defined just what quality means in the clinical trial environment. And to me, this is almost like poetry. You know, it's very straightforward, very clear. And it's these three bullets. They say quality of a clinical study is considered in this document as fitness for purpose. Quality is fitness for purpose. They go on to say that the purpose of a clinical study is to generate reliable information to answer the research questions and support decision-making. And then they add that qualifier while protecting study participants. So quality is fit for purpose. The purpose of a clinical study is to generate reliable information so as to make a decision or determination while protecting study participants. Hence, the quality of the information generated should therefore be sufficient to support good decision-making. Again, to me, I think this becomes a very solid touchstone in all that we do in delivering clinical trials and in our quality management systems. And it's always to come back to, hey, quality is defined as fit for purpose. Our purpose is all about generating reliable information to answer the research question. We want to do that while we are protecting study participants. And at the end of the day, the quality of the information generated should therefore be sufficient to support good decision-making. Now, I've made note about, to me, how this is, rather poetic. And, with that, then I've taken some poetic license to say, well, what does all of this then mean? Or how could we apply the same qualities perspective to the management of a trial master file? So as I walk through these different elements, then, I kind of start off with, well, quality of a trial master file then is considered in this document as fit for purpose. So then what's the purpose of a trial master file? Well, the purpose of a TMF is to permit both real-time as well as retrospectively evaluation of the conduct of a trial and the quality of the data produced. And just like with the other definition about quality in a clinical trial, where they had that qualifier saying, while protecting the rights and well-being of the trial participants, the purpose of our TMF to permit evaluation of the conduct of a trial and the quality of the data produced, that's qualified with, while also assisting the sponsor in successful management of the trial. And again, I think that's a part that we often miss. It stands to reason then that the quality of the information generated and collected should therefore be sufficient to demonstrate adherence to the standards of GCP and all other applicable regulatory requirements. So to me, again, I think this can be a touchstone for us, that yes, we still need to do all that we need to do to make sure that TMF will permit both real-time and retrospective evaluation of the conduct of the trial, but we cannot forget or overlook that it also needs to assist the sponsor in the successful management of the trial while it's being conducted. And another thing to consider, in the blue box, quality by design of trial master files, I've asterisked that to read that where TMF in this case is the entirety of the essential documents in their respective filing locations. So it's like the TMF ecosystem, so to speak. It's not just the eTMF. So as I've gone through then the regulatory expectations, a potential definition of just what quality means as it applies to trial master files and the management of a trial master file. What is our history then of delivering to these quality expectations? And of course, our history is rooted in our paper TMFs. The diagram here, I think is probably pretty typical of your process for how you went about managing a paper trial master file. You start the left with generating maybe from a desktop unit the actual documents that you print. You circulate them for review and approval. They get signed. Maybe they're copied and scanned so that they can be distributed to the appropriate persons in the know. As it's distributed, then, there will be those that will keep the information in their paper files at their desk. The scanned images might go into a SharePoint file or folder for wider access. And then, as this person has these essential documents, collecting and stacking up on their desktops, periodically, they're going to mosey over to the paper archives. Oftentimes that's in another building. It's in a locked and secured area. It's not easily readily accessible because it's there to basically protect and preserve those documents. But periodically somebody goes over there and they take all of this paper documentation and they three-hole punch and they put it in the appropriate tabbed TMF file binders. Generally speaking, as you talk about paper TMF being able to be utilized as a communication tool, well, the reality is no one's going to go to the archive area or the paper TMF locked area and hold team meetings and share information. I mean, that just didn't happen in that kind of environment. Now, I've not reflected on here what happens at closeout. And what is it that will happen at closeout? Well, of course, that's where you have your heroes. That's where you have all hands on deck. Wow, we've had a successful trial. This is a pivotal trial. We're going to get inspected. We need to make sure our documents are up to date. So out come the heroes and this flurry of activity to make sure that all of those documents that have been produced through this long stream of process here is appropriately reflected in the paper TMF. And then, of course, at the end of the day, basically what happens as we now come back and try to reconcile to those quality objectives I stated earlier of being able to permit real-time evaluation of the trial, assist in the conduct of the trial, and then be used to demonstrate adherence to GCP. Well, you can see from that scorecard that we basically accomplished 1 out of the 3. Again, you cannot do real-time evaluation of a paper TMF because it's too difficult to try to keep it up to date at all points. It's not really useful in assisting in the conduct of a trial because, again, team members are not going to go to the paper TMF location to basically make sure they're using the latest version of a document and using it for forward processing. However, that paper TMF historically did do a very good job for us of demonstrating adherence to GCP. It may have taken a Herculean effort to get it populated, but we have a history of many successful inspections on paper TMFs. Lastly, I draw your attention to the 3 bubbles at the bottom of the diagram, and I'm just highlighting, the 3 predominant purposes of this trial master file or document management system, and that is that there's the source document systems that in a paper environment operate independently of, say, the information dissemination and forward processing systems, which also operate independent of the TMF. Again, that results in all we're really able to do is at the end of the day demonstrate that we've been compliant with GCPs. How are things then in the eTMF environment? Well, from an eTMF kind of standpoint, we're still going to have a lot of the same processes where you're generating the documents. Oftentimes they're still printed, circulated for approval, copied, scanned, distributed. We share it with people, whether directly or on SharePoint sites. Periodically, people will file them into the eTMF, and you see that I have this red box reading, an added bonus. The added bonus is you have this whole upload and QC process you have to go through to where it's not as easy as just 3-hole punching those papers and finding the appropriate tab and filing them in the paper TMF. You have this added requirement you have to go through of making sure the document's correct, it's scanned correctly, it's uploaded correctly, and so forth. What about at closeout? Well, at closeout, quite frankly, oftentimes we still have the hero. Now, in this diagram, you can see that I've transformed the hero into an ice hockey player. And of course, what I'm referring to is when you're uploading all those documents at the end of a trial, your eTMF has the additional added bonus of demonstrating that you've loaded those files at the end of the trial. And we've always called that the hockey stick, to where there's not very many documents, and then at the end, boom, that tail shoots up, and it's showing how all those documents were added at the end of the trial. How then have these early TMFs then done in regard to the quality objectives of a TMF, which are to permit real-time evaluation, assist in the conduct of a trial, and demonstrate adherence to GCP? Well, quite frankly, it has performed even worse than the paper TMF, because in this electronic environment, the sponsor's now been outed that they've not been using the TMF to basically help assist in the successful management of the trial. Instead, they've just populated all those documents there at the end. So once again, we have source document systems that are generally operating independently of the information sharing systems, which are operating independently of the trial master file. So what should we be doing about this then? Well, I think that the answer comes down to we need to be more effective, frankly, at generating these 3 gray circles. That by integrating, the generation of the document, the sharing of the information, and the filing of that information so that, real-time evaluation can be permitted, I think it's only then that we can more greatly assist in the successful management of the trial. And I would offer that a way of doing that. Here's one example, and that is to fully integrate the TMF ecosystem with your eTMF. And that is to position the TMF and the eTMF as an integral part of the clinical trial delivery process, leverage the built-in quality control of validated source clinical systems, CTMS, EDC, authoring systems, regulatory safety. There are others. If the source systems are designated as ancillary trial master file systems or connected to the eTMF through validated integrations, the TMF is in a continuous state of completion and doesn't require redundant quality checking. Other records will continue to, require the complete, correct, and current quality checks. And what I have in the diagram over on the right is, again, your source system is either integrated with your eTMF, or maybe the source system is actually integral or a workflow within that eTMF, such that your generation and approval of the documents are automatically then available in the eTMF for sharing, for assisting in the delivery of the trial, and also automatically filed, so you don't have to worry about it being complete. It basically then does the job of integrating those three bubbles of source document generation, sharing of that information for forward processing, filing the information for evaluation, and along the way, you're doing away with those non-value add quality checks. You're doing away with the hero that comes in at the end, and you're doing away with the hockey stick that we get from loading all those documents in at the end of the day. Our scorecard, hey, we are permitting real-time evaluation. We are assisting in the conduct of the trial, and we are demonstrating adherence to GCP. Again, your means for doing that are varied. There's varying degrees that you can have this fully integrated approach. Some of it being at the bottom, a more manual approach where you do have, the scanning and uploading. But if you have documents from source systems, you could be doing validated system integrations with your eTMF. You could be manually transferring the files to the eTMF. You could have hot links, to these other locations. Hot links can be broken. You can designate these other systems as TMF locations, and then maybe at the end of the trial, migrate them to your eTMF. So there are many options available to you. I've listed the pros and cons. But at the end of the day, as we come back to, again, E6 expectations, their expectation is we will take a risk-based quality management approach to all that we do. In 5.03, they directly outline the whole risk evaluation process of assessing the likelihood of errors occurring. In this case, it would be our TMF is incomplete. The extent to which such errors would be detectable, the impact of such errors on human subject protection and reliability of trial results. Well, again, as we talk about risk and risk assessment being likelihood times impact times detection, if you have, validated IT integrations among these systems, what is the risk that those documents generated and automatically filed results in TMF that are not complete, correct, or not current? And my view is that risk goes to zero. So what you would want to do is, as you've addressed all of these issues in a more integrated fashion, you can then focus the more non-value add activity of quality checking afterwards on those documents that are still, of high importance, that they have critical impact there's a high likelihood they're not going to be complete, and you don't know that. So that basically is the completion of the presentation part. I'm open and welcome to your questions.
Thank you so much, Terry. What a fantastic presentation. I do see a few questions from Jess in the Q&A section. I can answer the first one. Yes, it will be available, Jess, I promise. And the second, Terry, I don't know if you see it there, basically asking about the biggest challenge that you see in creating a fully integrated TMF, eTMF.
Much of that is going to be cost. And you also have maybe some different needs based upon the sponsor itself. For example, your large pharma, have the resources and the wherewithal that, number one, they're going to have established GCP systems, many of which are generating these essential documents, and they are more likely have the resources, whether that be money or people, to basically bring about these validated integrations. A small and even mid-sized pharmaceutical companies don't have that leisure, whether that be money or the resources. So in which case, look at some of your softer integrated approaches. For example, file transfers that are done on a periodic basis. Think about also, again, designating these source systems. Say, for example, a CTMS. If you're a company that's using a CTMS for drafting, reviewing, approving, and distributing your site monitor visit reports, and of course, those are very critical, essential documents. We'll designate your CTMS as a TMF location. Now, there are issues with that, not the least of which would be when an inspector comes, then they are now given the opportunity. I mean, if they request access to that CTMS, you have to give it to them. But likewise, as you take a look at the current EU clinical trial regulation, and then you look at the companion guidance in around to IT systems and data management, they're largely saying that they are allowed to ask and have access to any GCP system they want. So I think from a risk standpoint about regulators meddling in those systems, well, that risk is going to be there anyway. So I think it really comes down to taking a look at that next to last chart that I had that showed the different approaches you can take, and where there is critical mass. For example, integrating your CTMS with your eTMF, see if you have critical mass to where that is something that can be substantiated to do a validated integration. As your eTMF systems evolve and have more capability, some of them are going to provide you with the capability that you can now do document creation and authoring, within the eTMF and an eTMF workflow. Again, when you take advantage of that, when you have that approved document, it's automatically filed. It's automatically in there. You don't have to have those redundant, non-value add quality checks of, scanning, checking, quality checking, loading, uploading, periodic quality check. It's just, again, you're doing this through validated means where you don't have to have those checks. To answer your executive, how do I know it's complete and up to date? And it's because it's generated within the system. We're no longer trying to reconcile two sets of books.
Terry, I don't know if you were reading my mind or if you prepared this with Oliver, but we're actually presenting exactly that at noon today, so not the following session, but the session at lunchtime, where we're going to be digging into the TMF and looking at how you can produce a lot of that documentation directly inside your TMF, collaborate through Word or other tools like Word, without ever having to break that audit trail and get that, have that document leave the system itself, which is really, really nice. And then, the other thing I find very interesting is obviously on the business development side here at Montreal, we get into those discussions about integrations all the time. And I think, like you said, the most important is understanding and, substantiating like what that integration really means and if it's really worth it. And if you can find ways to do it other than integrating, like you said, like producing that documentation directly in your TMF, then, maybe that makes more sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, thank you. Any other questions from the group? I see some thumbs up and some people that agree with us or agree with you, Terry. I think you brought the value there. But if there are no questions, maybe we can bring up. It's a TMF utopia, Meredith says. I agree.
Well,
actually,
and
Oliver had a comment there as well. I don't know if you saw, Terry.
Oh, I'm sorry if I saw what?
Oliver had a comment there as well. In the live chat.
Okay.
How likely do you believe the concept of continuous evaluation, ongoing access to sponsor systems by inspectors will be in the near future? Assuming your suggestions would ensure we are more prepared for this type of new environment.
Well, very much so. I mean, so that is something that certainly we had seen with the advent of the COVID situation, right? And again, once that genie's out of the bottle, it'd be difficult to put that back in. It does lend itself to that. And, the other thing, boy, at the Avoca group, WCG Avoca, we do a lot of work with the smaller to mid-sized companies. And of course, their plea is going to be, well, we can't afford this stuff. And, what I would suggest then would be, well, more than likely, you're realizing a lot of your execution of clinical trial delivery through CROs. Beef up your qualification. Make, and don't just do a questionnaire, right? Do you do effective TMF management? Everybody does, right? But rather, please diagram for us what your TMF ecosystem looks like. Where do you have integrations with your document generation to your TMF? What mechanisms have you put in place to make sure that your TMF is complete and up to date at any point in time? Because you, as a small to mid-sized pharma company, right, you may not be able to afford all of these validated IT integrations, et cetera, but there's no reason you can't have that expectation of the CRO. And the CRO should increasingly have a far more integrated approach to things.
Very good point. I know we've gone a little bit over time. We were a little bit late as well, so in my books we're right on time. If you can just stop sharing your screen there, Terry, we'll just bring up a little bit of information. But again, I just wanted to thank you for a really, really interesting session. I feel like I could sit down with you and speak about this for another while with you. Kim, are you going to bring up the? There you go. So again, if there are any questions, anything that you'd like to hear about or ask our team or Terry, please feel free to reach out to us at any point. Up next, really interesting panel discussion about improving TMF culture and how to engage non-TMFers. I think that's a challenge that I know I hear about all the time internally, and trying to get that traction with people that maybe aren't engaged in TMFs at all times. So another interesting session coming up. But Terry, again, thank you very much. I can see the comments flying in, so I think people really, really appreciated the content. Let's head over. We have 10 or so minutes in the networking lounge. We can all continue chatting about this subject or the next one, and we will see you all soon. Don't forget, pretty cool pair of TMF converses to win. So don't forget to go and fill out the survey. Guys, everyone, thank you so much. It was a pleasure hosting you all today, and looking forward to some more discussions in the lounge. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Goodbye.